I've seen a video with someone sharing. When I relate, it makes me feel less alone. Going through teenage years is like, oh my God, I still think back on my hard days and I'm like super grateful I'm not going through that anymore. Like, I wish you guys were around.
Thank you, Sara, so much for joining us today. Just a little background on you for our audience. Sara Christine is a customer experience expert who focuses on connecting teams with their customers. Thank you so much for joining us today, Sara.
Well, thank you for having me, Meredith. I'm just so grateful to be here.
Awesome. So give our audience a little background about yourself first.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, so I am a customer experience expert, CX designer, and what that means is I help executives and teams connect to those most important assets, which are their customers. And usually that starts by getting connected with themselves, with their internal employees. And I help kind of make that full circle connection so that if there's all the way out to the front lines and then back and then out to the customers, and where is that data? And data can come in so many different ways. And most of the time I focus on what are the actual experiences people are having internally at a company and then externally as a customer, and making sure that that whole loop happens as it comes back to the executive so that people can make better decisions, smarter decisions. I mean, it's a new year, new decade, and
right.
So many people overestimate what they can do in a year and underestimate what they can do in 10. And so many companies that are alive today, if they're not actually focusing on their internal employees and believing that every experience counts or every person counts, customers feel that. And so right. Like in 10 years from now, you know, that is a critical thing to start doing today, because in 10 years from now, they may not be around because customers are so savvy and we're so stubborn. And
yeah, there's so much transparency with customers and companies. Everybody knows what's going on. So it's definitely to a business advantage to keep everything really positive, keep their employees happy, as well as their customers.
Exactly. And especially even what you guys are doing, it's incredible because you're giving your customers content, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, you're serving them with these amazing products, but you're also giving them content based on what they need and what they're interested in any way, right. Any way, shape, or form. Like, how do you continue to have the conversation so that you're top of mind? And it's not so salesy or that, it's actually out of love and care. And I think there's a lot of people, I mean, companies are not things, they're people. And so people run them, and everyone has their own passions. They have their own stresses. They have their own challenges. They're having their own experiences. And so many people miss the mark, especially as executives, I find, even having been one, that I took a lot of my team and their experiences for granted. I mean, everyone's a consumer. And so when you're reaching out, it's like people have ideas all over the place. So I find that it's critical now to continue to find ways to connect with yourselves, because I mean, if I were working with you, I would still want to listen to this.
Yeah, it's I mean, I'm glad you say that, because we're definitely trying to create a safe space for everybody to join in this conversation that's so critical, at least for us women, and I think eventually men will realize why it's so critical to them as well. So let's talk a little bit about your personal history with during puberty, and what led you to become so excited about My Florets? You know, we talked about a little bit about it, but what was your background?
Yeah, no, that's so great. I'm so honored to be here because I don't have kids yet, but I have 3 nieces and another sister who's pregnant with a girl. And so they're all going to have these conversations, and I'm setting them My Florets because I'm like, oh my gosh, that was like, I wish you guys were around when I was young.
We've heard that a lot.
And I'm sure my dad even does, because I find that, you know, with my experience with puberty was really challenging. I was a late bloomer. And so I actually didn't get my period until I was later in high school. And I grew up in a family with all girls, except for my dad, my poor guy. So my mom had really heavy periods every month, and she could never have a single child. So she ended up having 2 sets of twins. So I'm a twin, and then my younger sisters are twins.
Oh, wow. That must have been interesting for your mom.
Oh my gosh, I feel for her every day. I was like, I don't know how she did that. And, you know, having to deal with it, like, I mean, people out there that have twins, it's like 2 on 1. So you know like, and especially with girls going through teenage years is like, oh my God. I mean, that I still think back on my hard days and I'm like super grateful I'm not going through that anymore. Because it's like, it's tough. I can't even imagine being a teenager now.
Yeah. I'm glad I grew up without Facebook for the most part.
Me too. I can't imagine the pressure. I mean, I saw pressure from magazines. I didn't see it day, like in front of me and everywhere at school and having access to it globally.
Nonstop on your phone. Yeah.
Yeah. I can't even imagine like what my sisters are dealing with my nieces. And so, I think going through puberty, finding the right bra or having to get a bra, like all of that we had to go through. But I also felt for my dad, because as we know, like women there's four daughters, we're only 3.5 years apart, almost 4. And it's like we were all in the same cycle once we got our period. So my dad, he was going to the store that month at that time. He'd have to go and buy tampons and pads.
Right.
That's like, talk about awkward. It's like, it's awkward to talk about it. It's awkward to talk about it now. I mean, I'm not as like young anymore, that young. And I'm like, we're still
getting over that hump of like, who can we talk about it with? Yes. What are the terms that we can talk about it? It's
true.
Yeah.
It's true. And I feel like puberty is tough for anybody, for boys or girls, for everybody has their story, and it's personal. And so the only thing we can relate on is that we all go through it. And if we're women, we all get our periods and we are all doing it differently. And for me, when I got my period, it was so late because of stress, and I was an athlete, and it was just like it was the way that my story was unfolding, was that once I got it, I mean, internally at the household, my mom and dad were very open and my mom was very supportive, but we would never talk about it outside.
Right. Yeah.
It was not a thing. And even when I got my period, I had what my sisters called like the mom effect, where I actually had really bad pain and really bad cramps. And so I would have to be pulled out of school a lot of times throughout like every month. And that, my mom was very supportive, and she would, you would call in and say she's sick.
Right.
I'm not sick. I was just having my period. And so I took that lesson and I took what I learned. And then when I became, an adult and then got into the working world and at agencies and corporations and other companies, I would have to call in sick. And so you only get so many sick days. And so once I grew out of that, I was taking days unpaid because for whatever reason, my periods were really heavy. They would last forever. We tried everything to get rid of the pain. I was told that it's normal to have pain. I was told that every woman has pain. Some people just have it more than others. I mean, right, Meriden? Like,
definitely.
Exactly.
There's a lot of misconceptions surrounding menstrual health. I remember when I was younger and having a lot of menstrual problems, I would have really irregular periods, and then of course sometimes they were super heavy or super light. And I went into the pediatrician and the doctor was like, "Oh, it's perfectly normal. Like, here's the pill," I didn't really understand what the pill was going to do to my body, how it was going to help, why I should take it regularly. Like a lot of that information was not explained to me. And I know a lot of other people didn't have a clear concept of their menstrual health and how it was being affected by everyday things that we don't really even think about,
Oh my gosh, that's such a great point. Because when I was put on the pill as well, I had a horrible reaction. So it got worse. My pain was gone, but I had these horrible mood swings, and doctors would say, "Yeah, that happens. We could try different doses." And within 6 months, I had to be pulled off of that. And because I hadn't felt the pain in 6 months, when I came off, no one told me it was going to be like 10 times worse.
Oh my gosh.
The pain came back because it's like I don't know, like women, we have this amazing ability.
I think we do have very high tolerance for pain.
Yes, and then to be able to like forget it. Like it's like there's a
Like
magic.
it didn't happen.
Oh my gosh. And it's like, I hear this from so many of my friends that have had babies and they're like, I know. And then I'm gonna do it again. And it's like, and that extreme pain. But it's like having that every month, we're told kind of to suit up, show up and suck it up.
Yep,
And
suck it up.
and that was, it breaks my heart to think about that for pieces in the future to say, oh yeah, that's the advice I'm going to give them. Not at all.
Right. It's interesting how I think we don't understand what normal is. For instance, what's normal for us, sometimes we don't realize is not what we should be going through. For instance, like when I was younger and having super heavy periods, I didn't really think about it. I was like, oh, this is just what I'm, what my body's doing. And it wasn't until later I realized like, oh, that's not normal. That's not optimal, right? That's not what it should be. Let me work towards a better health and better condition for myself. And it sounds like you kind of went through some of that as well.
Exactly. Because I didn't find out that pain, the reason I was having such extreme pain was because I had endometriosis, but I didn't find out until I was 28. And that's because I had been working in the corporate world, and then I decided to continue on with my athletics. And so I was professionally competing. I had made Team USA. I'd gone to the World Championships, had won a silver medal, came back. Within a week, I had collapsed. And the doctors were like, oh, I had a horrible bike accident. So they thought it was because of that. It was like within a week. And my doctors found an ovarian cyst. And so they called me at work and they were like, we need to actually cut you open and take out your stress. And I was like, wait, I've never heard anyone talk about that way.
Yeah.
And they also said, okay, we're going to go in and see what's going on. And so when this doctor that went in, he was amazing. And one said, don't Google anything. He like, don't Google stuff because it'll start to, he was very sensitive to the consciousness, right? So thinking through things, he's like, I don't want you to get scared. And when I went through the surgery, which was terrifying, afterwards, they found out that I had endometriosis. And the doctor was the first one to say, a lot of women who have extreme pain will never know because the only way to know is when you go inside and you have to see.
They actually have to cut you open or go in with the scope to see that.
Yes, it's crazy. And then, it was like this whole process of awakening for me at 28 that I thought this was just like you. I had heavy periods or I'd have light periods or there were months where, oh my God, I would be able to go to work. I mean, I would be, taking Motrin and
right.
But I was like still able to show up. And then it's like I thought that was a miracle. But that's, it's really heartbreaking because that's every month that every has to deal with it. And we're ostracized for not showing up. We have to, just show up and
can't show pain.
Yes.
If not, then we're being dramatic.
Talk about it because, we're being overly emotional, which is like everyone has emotions. And so, there's been so many things attached to us as women that are seen as negative, that there are superpowers, because at that point, I mean, every month I was having like forced rest.
Right.
And so, then after that time period, I would feel better. It was like giving my body time to just organically be. I think it's crazy. Like when I think about it, no one can come into this world without these two things, a mother or a period.
Right.
And so it's like, why are we not celebrating that? And the fact that
why are we not taking care of it and helping our health along so that we can have, for those of us that want to have kids, have healthy pregnancies, and have healthy babies. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. It's really remarkable. And that's knowing that diagnosis happened for me and knowing what it is, that I had endometriosis. That's when things started to really change because I was able to make different decisions. So I was able to during that time period, I was taught that it was low estrogen diet. It's not go on a diet. You can't do these things anymore. I mean, the option was I have to change my sleep, my eating, my stress. The other option was medication.
Right.
And so I just felt I had already tried the pill. I had already been taking as much of the lower end pain medications that I possibly could. And I just felt like that's not long-term health for me to continue to go down that.
Yeah, it's not sustainable in the long term. Not to mention the side effects from all the medications.
I think there are, and again, this is just my experience because there are many women I've met that have had endometriosis can come in many shapes and forms, cramps in many shapes and forms. I've known women that have had their surgeries where their uterus has had to be taken out for them just to be able to live and have
just to function day to day.
Incredible. And so, medication is a positive, to be able to bridge. But if that's the only option that I had, I mean, you're right, like long-term effects, like I knew enough then that it was my responsibility now to take care of Sara. And in order to do that, I had to really check in on my stress, my sleep, and my eating. And those things change.
I'm so glad that you mentioned those are daily habits, right? And
we have to
I think at the beginning of the journey, my personal journey, nobody really explained that to me. That was something I had to Google. I did have to go to Google. And I've since read a lot of material about it and a lot of different books. And I think now a lot of doctors are starting to integrate that into their practice, which is phenomenal. I think the more information along the lines of daily habits that women can get, it's gonna help our health so much more, to be able to function better on a day-to-day basis and a month-to-month basis, as well as staying off of medications that we don't really need.
Yes, I think you're right, because that's such a great point, Meriden, because I was told, just take this medication, even if it's Motrin or Advil or Aleve, like just take these and you'll be able to go through the day. And I still use them to bridge because it's not an all or nothing situation. I would never say like, I'm completely clear, like, because every month is unique and every month is different stress levels. Did I sleep well? Am I eating well? Like the holidays are coming on. I'm not going to lie. Is in the picture.
I think we're all like cheating a little bit on the diet that we, things we know we shouldn't be eating versus.
Exactly. But I do feel like, no, I didn't, just like you, I didn't know there were other options. I didn't even know I had choices, and I didn't know that was my responsibility, that it affected it. Like I didn't know eating affected. When I was a professional athlete, I found out that my eating was the one that affected whether I maintained my period or not. Not how much exercise I do, not overstress. It was actually not getting enough
food. That's interesting. I know I've heard a lot like, this I guess like a lot of exercise is what affects that. And so I'm sure like your diet, you probably didn't realize at the time how much your diet was affecting that. And it's interesting what they recommend to athletes for their diet. I'd be interested to hear more about that. What they recommended you during that time period.
It's so funny. I wish I could tell you they knew what they were talking about. They just was eating like 4,000 calories a day, and they were like, just have to get it in, because I am very grateful. My mom started us off very young as an athlete. In fact, there was no sports for girls or women in our community, and so my mom threw my sister and I into boys soccer teams.
Oh, wow.
Boys with pigtails running around. People are like, who is that? Those little kids with pigtails. Those little. It started our metabolism, and my mom knew enough and my dad knew enough to do that, which was really great. But when I was becoming a professional athlete later in life, my metabolism was actually really hard to keep weight. And I know that people will be like, oh, that's such a problem. Like, oh, poor you. It was actually very, very tough. And it was really traumatic for me, because actually I was having trouble sleeping, having trouble maintaining weight. And I was overworking my body to achieve these kinds of goals. And I made those choices. But in that process, I was leaning on people to support me, to say, how do I get better? And, at the time, and this was, 12 years ago, the doctors were giving me nourishment through IVs, and they were telling me you have to just continue to eat. They weren't getting into the
specifics of what you were,
till after I had I came back from the world championships and I had that accident, and then I found the ovarian cyst, and it was those doctors. Then I had to switch. One of my doctors told me, he's like, you're going to go now work with these specialists. And the first thing they did was start to remove those high estrogen foods.
Mm-hmm.
For the pain. And they gave me like more leafy greens and great, awesome recipes to try. And they were like, you need to start doing a routine in the morning where I call it my unicorn juice that I still do. A mix of all of these different types of powders and, and green juices. I still do the celery juice in the morning, and I take a set of supplements that have changed over time to adapt to my body. But I had to rebuild my body from scratch because of that. Like, I had no idea. I mean, I'm sure you know too, it's like, I had no idea where to start. And so I ended up having, after that, Googling it. I would not recommend Googling anything that's trauma on, but I would definitely Google, where to start in nutrition. And it doesn't have to be so extreme. Like, I remember my doctors were just earth angels. They were just like, little by little, let's just add in this like morning routine, right?
Yeah.
And can you just do that? You don't even have to go to bed early. It's just like, start there.
Get that smoothie in.
Oh, I got that celery juice in, or I got that green juice in, or, I started taking a different approach in the morning where I was just getting up and having like a bullet coffee that I would make at home with all stuff. And it starts in that nourishment of like, I had to learn to love on Sara. I had to learn what that means and what is my body like and what it doesn't, because my doctors were really wise, and I'm very grateful. At the time, they said everyone is different. So one thing out there, like when people say, this is what you should do first thing in the morning.
Right. It doesn't work for everybody. Everybody's body is different. I noticed that in addition to the smoothies, like the greens, I need a lot of fat to to not only digest that, but to actually feel full and to have energy. Like, I definitely have to include a lot more like coconut, avocado, things like that in my smoothie as well.
Yeah, exactly. Me too. And I have friends that actually have to do the opposite, and they fast all the way through until noon. And I think that's amazing. I'm like super envy, but I can't. I have to immediately start.
You got to get up and get that.
I have to, and then I've got to get that fat in, just like you. Like, I have to have something that's soothing. And even on a hot day, like, I'll still drink something warm first thing in the morning, or like neutral. But it's all of those things that because of those experiences of self-exploration, once I got that diagnosis, once I understood a little bit more, that was the turning point for me to experiment with myself. It was kind of like that green light of, okay, let's see what's going to decrease the pain every month and increase my energy levels. And like you said, everyone is different. And I think that's tough too, because it feels like I have to go it alone. Right. And I don't know who to talk to. And, I'm very grateful that I was able to turn to some of my girlfriends and, like my sisters, but it's still an awkward conversation because it's so unique for every person.
It is. Absolutely. Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, no, I definitely can relate to that. Because, for instance, my business partner, she's in the same situation. She also has PCOS, but she has a completely different type. So like I'm kind of like you, where I had a lot of trouble controlling my weight. And I've had pain, a lot of intense pain as well. Whereas but I eat a lot, like throughout the day, I eat a lot and I always have, versus her, she just won't really eat that much. And she actually now fasts a lot for the majority of the day, which seems to be working for her. So I definitely relate to that point where it's very personal. What works for one person may not work for you. And then sometimes you do feel like, well, why do we have to go through this, these issues? So
gosh, that's so true. Like, one size does not fit all.
Yeah.
Like, why do I have to then go through and explore all of that? And so I think you're right. Balancing that is hard, because I had to go through, just like you, just like many women, exploring themselves. Everything is different. And then on top of that, there's this outside stress and pressure.
Oh yeah.
and from others saying, why can't you show up? Or just, a lot of people like myself, I used to do is just, you suffer through it.
Yeah.
And I think that emotionally that takes a toll, because it's really underestimated how much we aren't even allowing our bodies to rest and recover. And, I think it's a really right timing to start talking about this. There are just so many amazing not-for-profits out there. There's companies that are like us, like for-profits, that are trying to have this conversation. And everyone's trying to do it through their lens, which I think is all important. And I would love in the next year to start to see more of what this is going on, more of having this conversation and people coming together over the same thing of like, why is this even awkward? Like, I just want to neutralize, like going to work. Like I've worked with teams, and it's like with the women, I will talk to them and say, okay, when's your time of the month? And they're like, what? And I'm like, just mark it in my calendar, because like, why are you going to get on stage or have a big meeting or
when you might not be feeling well, you never know what issue's going to pop up. Like, don't stress yourself out. Yeah.
Exactly.
That's a nice way to, I think I'm going to adopt that.
I love it.
Not schedule anything that's going to stress me out around that time.
Like I have two sisters that are, they're PAs and doctors and neurologists. They do things that are emergency based, right? But like most of the time, the things that most of us are working in, it's not an emergency. And so, if we can move things around in the schedule, then why not? Like, why?
Definitely. It's probably another level of self-care that we can give ourselves.
Yeah, it's hard enough to do it ourselves and have to setting those own boundaries. Like I used to take mental health days and, had to call all these things. And I'm so tired of that, having to make up names for the fact that I could say to my employer at the time. I wish I could just say, like, I have my period. And they would be like, oh, I get it. Whether they're a man or a woman, and just say, okay, do what you got to do, because you're not enough. Right. And it's like every person in the company counts. And nowadays you just can't get away with ignoring that.
Yeah, you can't. I think about how would companies integrate something like that for their employees. I can't really, I haven't, I guess, really thought of any particular ways that employers, aside from giving days off, like how do you think that employers can help their employees incorporate that into their day-to-day work life?
Yeah, that's such a great question. It's like, I am like taking on that challenge as we speak, like with so many different kinds of clients too, because I think it's starting the conversation. So I think by saying whether it's you manage a team, you can have, if you're engaging with another person, and whether you're a lead on a project, you're managing a team, or you're an executive or CEO of an entire company, I think it's just like what we're saying, is starting that conversation so that it opens doors and windows so that people start to feel safe, or at least know that they're in a slightly safer environment, where they're not going to like be threatened to lose their job, or they have to have a hidden agenda, or have to like manipulate their words. Just to be able to say like, hey, once a month, if you need some downtime, then they can work from home too. Like it's not it wasn't like every single hour. There were some serious dark days, but could still function. I would have loved to have that freedom of my employer saying, like, instead of just saying I'm working from home today, and saying like, I'm working from home, like I've got my period, it's not a big deal. Like, and I think that take time. That's what I was saying. Like at the end of this decade, that would be radical. And people in those companies were just like, it didn't matter. I could go to the grocery store and nobody gave a hoot like that. I was tampons or pads, like still uncomfortable, like still looking at it. And so if that's what's happening here in the States, imagine where we're talking about real cultural stigmas in other countries that, they believe have a woman's menstruation. And even in India, what I've been told is that menstruation is punishment for being born. So there's still a lot of those we're trying to grapple with, but
there's a lot of stigmas in many different cultures that it's also something that we want to tackle as well with our podcast. But you were explaining the work that you're doing in India with the Shakti project. Do you want to discuss that a little bit?
I would love to. And I'd love to really quickly wrap up too. Like, it's not an easy feat. Like, this is not an easy conversation.
No, it's not.
I mean, it's awkward for me to have it. Like, it's not an easy conversation for an executive to say, like, I'm going to roll out a program where women are going to start to feel more comfortable and they're right? Like, even just that, it's like, oh, am I separating men from women? Like, what do the men get? You know, why are we treating the women this way? And so I think it, like you said, it starts with a conversation and really just being able to navigate individually who in the company needs extra support, because there's times where guys need extra support.
I'm sure eventually guys will also be honest and vulnerable with what their needs are, because I'm sure while I don't know the ins and outs of men's health, I'm sure that there are different topics or different times that they need different kind of support as well, where they might want to work from home for something, or, you know, to take care of themselves.
Exactly. Like, Meriden, it's not all or nothing, right?
Yeah.
It's like, there's also we're starting with the period conversation, but it leads to something bigger. Like, can we support each other emotionally and mentally, and when it comes to stress physically? So people deal with stress in different ways. And I think it's really empowering to say to all of your employees, I want to be able to connect to you more intimately, more personally, to be more vulnerable, so you feel safe, that if you're having a day where you need to grieve, or there's a day where you're just totally burned out, like, that's the same feeling for me as when I'm on my period. It's like, I'm wiped out. I can't leave the house. Like, there are some days where I'm just like, you know, I just don't got it today. And so, like, is there a freedom in a company that supports me in that way, where it says, you still count, Sara, like, you are still important, Meriden. Like, I hear you, I see you. Why don't you just take the day off? Like, then you're going to be 10 times better, and knowing that you're going to be even more loyal. And I think leading into the Her Shakti project was one of those ways was, how can I, as a for-profit company, start to help in starting that conversation? And I met these remarkable people, Ishu and Ritnik. Ishu, she and her brother Ritnik have been co-founders with the Her Shakti project. They are actually co-founders of an NGO called Jeevan Arth Foundation. And I met them only, 6 or 7 months ago, and they had come here from India, and they've been working. Their father has had this really amazing export company for 25 years, and they're working at taking that over. But they started this because it was actually the men, Ritnik and his friends, that overheard men talking these negative things about women and their periods. And they believe women strong, country strong. So they like mother strong, sister strong, women strong, country strong. End of story. They're this new generation that is remarkable. And for me, it was like, oh, and it's all about ending the period stigma, because and I'm like, great, like, what a better place to start, where like, it's like only 36% of women in India even have access to sanitary pads. And only out of 12% out of that are actually using them. And it's seen and felt like almost like a drug deal, like where you go to the drugstore and you have to get it in a closed bag, and you have to do it behind the counter. Like, it's not a theft. It's just seen as that. It's very much, women are seen as toxic. They drop out of school because they're not educated. And so what they've been doing with this foundation, it's really remarkable, is they've been working with a team in Scotland, in Edinburgh, a school that creates reusable sanitary pads. So the team in India actually goes out to these awareness campaigns, and they separate the girls and the women from the boys and the men. And so the boys and the men who have founded this foundation talk to the boys and men and educate them on women's health and why.
That's really interesting that the guys are taking that initiative and, you know, getting involved and being able to communicate that to other men, because I think definitely it can't just be women who are championing this. It needs to also be men.
Exactly. Like, I feel, it's no secret that the men have had the microphone for a long time.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so I feel like we need the people that have the microphone to be advocates for those who don't have it yet. And I know eventually that will switch, and believe in it. And I believe in more equality, a we versus he versus she. But until then, men are our biggest advocates. There are so many men. I have to tell you, because I started working on this project, and when we started collaborating and trying to help them gain traction here in the United States, I started going out and talking to not just guy friends, but talking to people, managers at grocery stores. And when we started creating events, like there were a lot of men involved, and I would ask them, and they would actually complain about how uncomfortable it is, that they feel like it's not fair. Like women should get a fair shot at just being able to take downtime. And how can they support the women that work for them in a better way? So there's a lot of men out there that are really just very beautiful, very passionate, huge advocates, just like these amazing guys in India who are like, we have to do our part. So if they can educate the men while the women are getting educated on their own health and how to use sanitary products and those kinds of things, I mean, it's a win-win on both sides. And they're
definitely
making that traction. And it's like, great, if it's going to start there, how can we move that wave here into where we're, we as women, I can't imagine any woman, even in America, that doesn't have access to sanitary.
Yeah.
Like would never think that, oh, I don't have them. I would go and ask another woman.
Right.
Right. And you have them in bathrooms. They're available.
Right.
You can't even imagine what to do if that wasn't the case. So it's a little bit disconnected too, to think that even exists in 2019.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, our realities over here are quite different than other countries.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah, and it's really important. I think, like you were saying, is to have this conversation, because the cultural stigma, I think, is everywhere. Like even when
every culture has their own, their own stigma.
Yes, like the first time we started talking, it was like, yeah, let's talk about our periods. Like. Like, what was yours like? What was mine like? And it's funny, but it's like really wild because we don't do it like a lot. And I think that also is just kind of one of those topics that we're still trying to normalize. Like where,
right. And I think about like, being a teenager and how you kind of suffer through things because you don't have the information, and because people are so uncomfortable talking about this, then you miss out on that information until so much later in life. And you realize like, I could have been healthier, or I could have, not had so much pain, or whatever it is, whatever the issue is that you're dealing with, just because you weren't comfortable to have that conversation with somebody else.
I think that's really powerful. Like if we can just take courage and just be able to say, even if it's just with another woman, to say, what it's like for you, how has it been? How are you doing? Do you struggle in a month? Like being able to reach out just to have that seed planted of starting that conversation. I mean, one person, like just like us having this conversation, it's changing it, because this will ripple effect. And I think that's where, the work that I get to do, and I'm very honored to do with the Her Shakti project, is really powerful to me, because I've been able to work with the artisans and the beneficiaries and create these medallions that are the medallions of hope that we just started with 4 of them, and I'm wearing the inner truth, and being able to say that if I purchase something, like to shop to give, and like just like what you guys are doing, like it's amazing how many companies are giving back now. And it's like, okay, great, I can shop. And if I buy a medallion, then 5 women in India gets reusable sanitary pads for 2 years and personal counseling.
That's awesome.
And they get education. And so we were saying, like, what are other ways to complete that full circle of giving? Because I believe, if I'm wearing this, people are like, where did you get that? And then, it's like, oh, it's an icon. It's a symbol for what is being represented. And I got to tell you, Meriden, it immediately starts the period conversation.
Yeah.
Oh, this is what it's for. And this is
awesome. It creates awareness for other people. Yeah.
I feel very honored, and it's very special, but at the same time, it's also just like, how can I do my part? Because there's been so many years where I felt like I was nobody, and nobody, like, why would anybody listen to me? Like, I should definitely just cover up that I'm having a tough time through my period, or I'm having a tough time, like everybody did in puberty. It was just like, I bypassed a lot of things, and I really, I didn't give my voice an actual way to express myself, and I just hid that. And so I suffered a lot, I think, for me, like emotionally, because I felt really alone. Even though every woman has their period, I felt scared to reach out and to talk to someone because it was so uncomfortable. And it was so like, I didn't, it was that awkward moment between two people where you're just like, oh God, like nobody wants to sit through this. Like who wants to? And so now it's really a beautiful time because there are so many people, so many women, so many men rallying around this cause. Because I mean, my dad couldn't get away with it. He had 4 girls. Like he
had to confront it.
The tampon talk. We had the fact. We had to go and buy products at the store. God bless my dad. Like, he was a total miracle. But that's, a lot of fathers, maybe there are single fathers out there that have to have this conversation with their daughters. And, that's like, where do they go to even know how to start? And My Florets, you guys have that on your site, which I love, is like, here's just a starting conversation. Because it's kind of similar to what I do with a lot of my clients. Is like, we just start. When was the last time you talked to your frontline employee? And they're like, well, I don't know, maybe never. And like, when was the last time you talked to a customer? Like, where's that? Can we break those barriers and break down those silos that says, I am this person in this role, and I like other people do that. When it says, right now we're in this, like everybody's in this together.
Right.
So, it's like I go in and I say like, hey, let's just look at somebody in the eye and smile and just ask them like really how they're doing. The same thing here where you're like, I'm going to just go in, take a deep breath, and I'm going to have this conversation, whether it's with my niece or with a friend or, with their person with their child. Like it's important to have these conversations.
Absolutely.
Periods, and just to start neutralizing it. Every time I say that word, it just feels like a bad word or something. Where like people are like, cringing. I don't want to have that conversation.
Well, it's really encouraging to hear how you're helping employers, reach their teams and have the teams reach out to their customers. Definitely more conversations are necessary as we go forward in the new decade, because we are entering a new decade. Hey. So just to wrap up, Sara, what is your hope for how we can continue the conversation around female health with, the work that you're doing in the nonprofits?
Oh, that's a great question. And I think, for this year and for the next decade, I mean, at the end of this decade, like I said earlier, I would love to have in some way, shape, or form move the needle where it's a neutralized conversation, where women aren't paying extra money to go and buy these products, like that pink tax. And, I didn't even know about the pink tax years ago.
It's something I never thought about until recently.
Like I just didn't even think that there was like, why am I getting extra? Wait, why am I paying extra for something? Like, it's just like toothpaste and toothbrush. Like I have to have these things every month.
Right.
And I feel like there are those things, like by starting this conversation, I feel, in the next year, the biggest thing is that there's, even in 2020, with all of these conferences happening at Geneva or UN, they're talking about women and how we move the needle. And I feel like, can we break down the silos, even in the not-for-profits? Like for me, working with my customers and my clients, it's breaking down those barriers and silos to make deeper connections, because we're all really trying to work toward one goal, especially in a community. The same thing is happening with all these not-for-profits. It's like, how can we bring them together and start doing more work together instead of continuing to be so siloed? Because I feel like we really have so much power, and we can be so empowered to do more instead of owning our own slice. And that slice is very important. But I feel like, how can we create events? How can we create conversations? How can we do more of what you are doing, Meriden, with My Florets, to be able to talk about it, to be able to different stories? Because I think every experience counts. I think every person counts, and every personal story leads to another person feeling heard and seen. And
also contributing their piece, because once we have those conversations, when people feel better, when they're healthy, then they can go out and contribute something that society really needs from them, instead of them, feeling crappy all the time.
Yes, and not feeling alone.
Exactly.
you and I are relating, I didn't even know on so many ways. And even I didn't know I could even still have this conversation and feel better. Like, oh my God, Meriden, you went through that too. Like, it's like just two people talking about something that's similar, like looking for those similarities versus separating ourselves from the differences, I think is really valuable. And in the coming year, I would love to see that moving into 2020, where you guys are continuing doing what you're doing, and we're just empowering more people to have their experiences, because men have experiences with periods too. They've had that conversation.
They absolutely do.
I know my boyfriend doesn't get away from it. It's like it happens. Like, it's real. Like I've known people that hide that from in their relationship.
Oh yeah. It's just easier when you don't have to hide it.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's just so much easier if I just bypass and not talk about it. And it's like, that may be true, but like at that moment, but in the long run, like when I really need the support, when I'm having a really rough moment or a really rough time of the month, like, and I really need that support, like, I don't want to separate myself. Instead, it's like, okay, how can I, just like you, like, how can we continue to have these conversations to say, like, you're not alone? Because I know somebody out there also, like, anytime I've heard a podcast or a share, or I've seen a video with someone sharing, when I relate, it makes me feel less alone. And it's like, I couldn't put words to it, but that's what I was feeling too. And, it just brings a little bit more hope into that person's lives, into my life, to say, oh, okay, like, it's going to be okay. Like, I'm terminally unique, and I can, I'm part of something bigger, and, to feel really that connection is so powerful.
Yeah, I love how you explain breaking down the silos and just everybody being able to find similarities, because we're all human and we're all here, so we may as well make the most of our time together.
And I'm so grateful that I got to do this, like, together with you today, Meriden. I'm so grateful. Thank you so much. Like, this has been just so much fun talking about the most awkward thing.
Thank you so much, Sara, for joining me today. It's been great. I would love to continue the conversation with you as the year goes on, and to continue hearing about the Shakti project. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much.
If there are any topics you would like more information about, please leave us a comment below. And of course, hit the subscribe button and click the bell to be notified of new episodes.